All right. Let's see. Everything looks like it's working. Let me get this all squared away. There we go. Let me go to here. Perfect. Okay. That looks good. Very cool. So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 24 Days of Christmas, day 11. Tonight I'm feeling a bit under the weather. I've had a kind of sinus head cold for the past 2 days. Obviously my voice hasn't left me yet, so hopefully it doesn't, but tonight I'm probably not going to stream all that long. What I really kind of wanted to do today, since we did finish the live stream reading of A Christmas Carol. By the way, feel free to go and check out the playlist on YouTube by scanning this QR code right here. It's got all of the previous 10 episodes, which is the entire Christmas Carol story. Instead of moving on to the next story, what I actually wanted to do tonight is kind of show you the difference between live streaming, where any mistakes I make, any characters that maybe I'm not super happy with how I initially play them, are kind of locked because it's a live stream. I can't go back and edit it after the fact. I'm just streaming live. Versus actually doing it audiobook style. So actually creating an audiobook as if I were going through and editing it as I go. I don't know if that would be interesting to anybody, but that's what we're going to do tonight. Again, I'm not going to do too much. We're probably going to read maybe 10 minutes tonight, again, just because my voice isn't all that great, and I'm feeling a bit under the weather. But, yeah, it'll give you kind of a little bit of insight into how much work goes into actually creating a fully produced audiobook. So, without further ado, here is, again, the playlist. The playlist if you want to go and check out any of the previous episodes. But what I'm going to do is switch to this view. Very cool. So you should see, I'm going to show you how to do this, again, using A Christmas Carol. And if you're doing audiobook narration, generally speaking, what you'll want to do is read through the book all the way through at least once before you go in to narrate it. So if you think of this in a production sense, from a production standpoint or from a production mindset, you want to make sure you know who all the characters are. You want to make sure you know whether they are male or female, or non-binary. You want to make sure that you know what accents they might have. There are books that have been narrated, not by me, thank goodness, where somebody does the entire book as a normal accentless American, or they do it with an American accent, and then they get to the end of the book and, 34 chapters into this 50-chapter book, it says, he said with his Texas drawl, or they said with that, with a Scottish twang or something like that. And guess what you have to do with all of those 34 chapters where you've been narrating as this character? You have to go back and re-record, because generally speaking, the rights holder, the author, is not going to want you to. If they're supposed to be Scottish, they're supposed to be Scottish. If they're supposed to be from Texas, they're supposed to be from Texas. So with something like this, again, it's kind of a public domain book, so there's not really a publisher, there's not really a rights holder. You have a little bit more leeway because it's you producing the book, the audiobook. But if you're working with a publisher, or you're working with a rights holder, an author, they're going to want it done a certain way. So you want to make sure that you're hitting that. So generally speaking, you're going to read through the book at least once. Plus, it gives you a little bit of insight into the story. You can kind of downplay certain things, especially if you know that there's a twist coming, or you can upplay some things if you want to misdirect people that way. So you've got that much time already invested into the book. Then you've got to go and actually record the book. So in this case, I use a DAW, a digital audio workstation called Studio One. There is an update, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and create a new project. I have an audiobook template, but I'm just going to use my voiceover one because that's generally what I use. I've got it customized in certain ways that the audiobook one is a little bit out of date. And then I usually title things my kind of like, well, in this case it would be Charles Dickens. And then I say this is an audiobook, and then I say this is a Christmas Carol. And then all this stuff down here, I'll change it if I have a reason to. Otherwise, I just kind of leave it this. 44.1 16-bit is pretty standard. That's what I'll be exporting as for an audiobook anyway. So I'll just go ahead and record in that. And just checking the stream. Yep, everything still looks good. Let me move this down a little bit and over on this screen over here. Let me move this down a little bit. There we go. I'm streaming on Facebook, Instagram Live, TikTok. So Instagram and TikTok have the vertical format. Facebook has the landscape horizontal format. So I'm just adjusting some screens over there. And then this is my digital audio workstation. This is my DAW. And this is what I'm going to be spending most of my time in as I'm recording my audiobook. So you'll notice that I've got a track up here, and it's just named what my mic is. I might name it Chapter 1. And what I'll usually do is I'll come through and I'll just create new tracks for every chapter. So then I'll have Chapter 2, Chapter 3, etc., etc. That, for me, makes it easier for me to kind of go in and edit if I need to make any changes anywhere. And I'll go ahead and mute those tracks because I'm not using them. In this case, the book is set up in staves, so I might just do 5 staves, right, as the chapters. And that's pretty much where I'll start. And then what I'll do is you always give the kind of title and then who narrated it and then who the publisher is, if there is a publisher. So I might come in and I might actually just duplicate this track and then move it up and then name it Introduction or something like that. Might even be title. I'll just do titles. And then I'll make that one the recording one. And then I'll make it a little taller so I can see the waveform. And then I'll just do something super quick like A Christmas Carol in prose, being a ghost story of Christmas. Written by Charles Dickens. Narrated by Rob Sogomonian. And then I can put the playhead somewhere. I want to actually say production copyright. Let's see. Original publication was 1843. When did Gutenberg publish this? (2021). I'll leave that out for this. Usually, if you're working with an author or a publisher, they'll tell you how they want the titles to be. Generally speaking, if you're doing this kind of on your own, I think you can kind of use whatever you want. I would probably just say production copyright 2025 by, Rob Sogomonian, or Signear Media Studios, which is my media production, or Articulate Studios, which is my voiceover troupe, since that's where my voiceover work goes. Actually, yeah, I'll do that. Charles Dickens. Narrated by Rob Sogomonian. Production copyright 2025, Articulate Studios. Then you always leave about 3 to 5 seconds at the end, and you usually leave about a half second at the beginning. So you'll notice at the top of my DAW, I've got a bunch of different numbers up here. So I start a little bit over a second in, so I can actually grab the front of this and drag it back just a bit. And now I'm starting just under a second. I want a little shorter than that. We'll do that. So that's about a half a second of silence or intro. And then I usually let it run for 5 seconds, but then I trim it back to about 3.5. So there's 14. It's a little bit before 14. So 1, 2, 3 and a half-ish. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can do 3, you can do 5. It doesn't really matter. But those are the breaks in between the chapters if you're listening on a platform like Audible, for example, or Spotify, or wherever you get your audiobooks. And then I'm done with this track. I'll basically go back and listen to it. A Christmas Carol, in prose, being a ghost story of Christmas. Written by Charles Dickens. Narrated by Rob Sogomonian. Production copyright 2025, Articulate Studios. So that's a little bit long, the spacing in here. These ones here are kind of like a half a second. This one was like 3/10 of a second, 3/4 of a second. So I'll just make that a little shorter so it lines up a little bit better. There we go. And then I'm going to turn off recording on that track because I'm done with it. And I'm going to make it small because I don't need to touch it anymore. If I were producing this for real, I would probably export this, run my processing on it, which removes mouth clicks, it just does a little bit of EQ, and then it sets the audio levels to the correct specifications for Amazon, for Audible, and then that'll work for pretty much any audiobook publisher. So what I will do now is switch down to track 2, which is chapter 1, which we've already said is going to be stave 1, and then I'll set my audiobook screen to there, and then I'll come down and I'll just, again, start narrating. And I'm not super worried about how much time I have at the beginning. Like, I'm not going to hit record. I have a keyboard shortcut to start the recording. I'm not going to hit record and then, like, within a half a second try and start talking. I really don't care because I can edit this as much as I want, right? After the fact, I can come in and trim it. I can lengthen certain sections if I want to. I'm not going to worry too much about it. But I will just go ahead and start recording. Now, the way Studio One works, whatever track you have set to record will record. So since we're doing chapter 1, that's what I've got set to record. You see that there's the level meter over here, the green line that's kind of bouncing up and down with my voice. So I can check and see whether I'm peaking, which is going a little too loud, or not. So let's go ahead and get started over here. And I'll just go ahead and get it started, and then I'll give the chapter introduction, and then I'll get into narration. I'm going to make a couple of mistakes as I go and show you a method called punch and roll, which is a recording style that makes it quicker, in my opinion, to just edit through a book as you're recording it. So I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Oops, I had the playhead in the wrong location, so let's get that back to the beginning. There we go. Stave 1. Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a coffin nail. Oops, I made a mistake. I said coffin nail instead of doornail. So I am going to go back and I can kind of see where I've been recording, right? And I know that I took a pause before I said old Marley was as dead as a coffin nail. So that's pretty much, I can infer that that's what this little section of the waveform is me saying that. So I can take the playhead and move it back to before that and listen just to make sure. Old Marley was as dead as a coffin nail. And yep, that's exactly right. So, one method of editing this is as I'm recording, I can snap or use a dog clicker. And what'll happen is, let's actually do that. I'll start recording back from over here. Old Marley was as dead as a coffin nail. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know, of my own knowledge, what there is particularly dead about a doornail. So, what did I do? I made my mistake back here, and then I gave myself an indicator that, oops, I made a mistake. And if I zoom this out a bit, it's pretty easy to see where you've made those mistakes because most of your waveforms are pretty small, like normal talking volume. And then you see this big spike, and you're just like, okay, cool, that's probably a mistake. And you might make mistake after mistake after mistake, so you might have 3 or 4 of these in a row as you're making your mistakes and then correcting them. The challenge with this, and some people love doing it this way, and I'm not here to knock on if this is your method, great. I'm glad you have a good time with it. You have to go back through and either listen or preview the entire chapter again to make sure that you don't leave any of these in before you publish the chapter. So you have to go back and listen again to this, and then hear your snap, and then listen to the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one, and then figure out which take you like, and then keep that one.
Old Marley was as dead as a coffin nail. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail.
So maybe that's what I want, and that's what I do, and I'm like, all right, cool, I like this take. I'm just going to go ahead and delete all of this. And now I've got a fixed audio file for that section of the book.
And Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail.
See, that's one way to edit. I think that's super time consuming. What I like to do is called punch and roll. And I just undid the two recordings that I just, the recording that I just did and the edit that I just did. I just undid those. If I know that I made a mistake.
Old Marley was as dead as a coffin nail.
I can just move my playhead back to where I have good audio. Maybe the end of this, maybe right at the beginning of this. It kind of depends. And I might listen back just to this dead space to see if I took a breath. And I did. You can hear a little bit of a breath in there. So I might actually put the playhead before the breath, which is fine. Right there, there's silence, or there's room tone. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit record. And the way that I have Studio One set up, it's going to go back 4 seconds and play back what I read correctly, and then automatically start recording when it hits this spot. So what that allows me to do is actually match the pitch, the tone, and everything of the previous recording, the previous sentence, the previous whatever, and then just continue as if I didn't make a mistake in the first place. So let me show you that. Oops, not that.
And Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to.
Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know, of my own knowledge, what there is particularly dead about a coffin nail. Oops, I made another mistake. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know, of my own knowledge, what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade, but the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will, therefore, permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a coffin nail. Dang it, made another mistake. But you can see how this method is just quick. I can just continue recording, and I know that it's a consistent recording. I don't have to go back and listen and make sure that I got the intonations right or whatever. And as many times as I make mistakes, or as many times as I might inflect words incorrectly, or just not like the way that I read it, or maybe you're starting to read for a new character and you don't like their voice that you gave to it. You can go back and really quickly try a couple of different versions, right? So let's go back and...
That Marley was as dead as a coffin nail.
And you don't have to go all the way back to your last, break-in sentence. In this case, I've got a little bit of a pause in between dead as a coffin nail, and I can come in here and just start recording from here.
Emphatically, that Marley was as dead
as a doornail.
Dead as a doornail.
And it sounds natural, because you're already reading the previous section, so your pauses are going to be natural, as if you were reading normally, as if you were doing it on one take. And then if you need any adjustments, like maybe there was a little bit too much of a pause there, I can trim it down just a bit.
Dead as a doornail.
Perfect. So, let me show you how, if I'm recording an audiobook, I keep track of character voices. And this is actually kind of fun. What I actually do is I make a second recording. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. But what I will do is I'll go new, I'll call this again, Charles Dickens, audiobook, Christmas Carol, characters. Okay. So now I've got a brand new file. And I can actually switch in Studio One very quickly between two or three or four open documents. So I've got my main recording here of the book. And then I can switch over to my character file. Now, let's go down to where somebody says something. Somebody who's an actual character. Here we go. Scrooge's nephew. I might come in here and say, nephew. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, so I won't try. Yeah, they just call him the nephew for the first chapter. So if I ever find out his actual name later, which I think we do, but for the sake of this, we're just going to call him nephew. If I ever find out his actual name later, I'll just come in and I'll rename this, or I'll put in like a / nephew / Phil, or, whatever his name is. But I won't, I'll leave this open. I'll just leave this file open. But let's go into chapter 2 here, just as an example. And I'm going to turn off recording there and turn on recording here, and I'm going to make this small. When I make something small, that indicates to me that I'm kind of done with it. I've already recorded it. I'm finished working on it. This particular chapter, this would not be a finished chapter. I would come in and, make this smaller so that I've got a half a second of empty space here. And another easy way to do it is just to find where you start and then go back a half a second and then just cut it and then delete it. And then that makes it a half a second. And then I'll make the big tracks, the ones that I'm actively working on. So in this case, chapter 2, which I think is still stave 1. So it's still technically chapter 1, but as an example for a character voice. And I'll come in and I'll go,
Stave 1.
Oops.
Marley's Ghost.
Track. There we go. A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you! Cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. Bah! Said Scrooge. Humbug! He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again. All right, so I know that this is Scrooge. Bah! Said Scrooge. Humbug! And I know that this is his nephew. A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you! Cried a cheerful voice. So what I'll do is I'll actually just copy this bit, and I'll put it into my other file for characters. So nephew, I'll just paste it. So now I've got a little clip of Scrooge's nephew. A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you! And then I will go ahead and save this file, and I will say, yes, copy that external file into this one. And then I might go find Scrooge. In this case, it's just Scrooge saying, bah, humbug. And I'm actually not super happy with how that one got read, so I might even just punch and roll over it. That this was the first intimation he had of his approach. Bah, humbug! So that might be my example for Scrooge saying bah humbug. So if I ever want to come in and take a look at this, or listen to it again just to kind of get the feeling of it, I have it. So I might just copy this and put it over in the other file. Again, just duplicate the track, and I'll call this one Scrooge. And I will say paste, and now I've got a Scrooge. Now, I don't need this much dead space after this thing, so I might shorten it. And then if I have another sentence where I'm maybe just using Scrooge's normal voice, like down here, "I do," said Scrooge, "Merry Christmas," I might record that and then put that in as a second little bit here. That way I just kind of have an idea, maybe multiple samples of how he sounds in different states. So let me go ahead and, again, save this. Yes, copy that file over. And let's see. So another thing with Punch and Roll, or at least another thing with Studio One, is it keeps the original track. So if I ever want to see what it sounds like, maybe with the bit of one but not the other, I can come and actually roll back the Punch and Roll. But that's a topic for another day. We're not going to go into that. But I don't need that.
Bah, humbug.
Good enough. We'll come over here, and I'm just going to record this bit down here. So let's go.
His eyes
I'm actually going to
sparkled,
start with his
and his
nephew.
breath smoked again.
"Christmas? A humbug, uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come, then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." So now I've got a couple of really good voice lines, and I'm actually just barely peeking over here. I've got a limiter set in Studio One, so it's kind of compressing and clipping those. I would generally go and adjust my my interface and record these so that they don't peak if I were doing this for a production book. But for the case of this, it's good enough, so.
"You don't mean that, I'm sure."
"I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." So here's a really good sample of Scrooge just talking and kind of being an ass. So I would go ahead and copy that and go ahead and put it into my Scrooge file. And I'll just go to the end of Scrooge and paste. So now I've got two different samples of Scrooge talking. I'm actually going to mute that one.
"Bah, humbug."
"Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." So that's how I track my characters. Now, this comes in really handy. Obviously, for two characters, it's not that big of a deal, but we're just getting this book started. When you're working on an audiobook that has, say, 20 characters, 100 characters, several hundred characters, this file can get pretty big. And I may start changing the colors of these tracks. In this case, I'm just using blue and blue because that's usually my recording track. But maybe Scrooge's nephew is a good guy, so I want to make him green. Maybe Scrooge is, I'm going to call him kind of ambiguous, so maybe I make him orange, right? Because he's not really, he's a bad guy at the beginning, but he has a change of heart and kind of a lot of character growth throughout, so I might make him orange. And then if there are some actual bad guys or, evil characters, I might make them red. So I might come in here and be like, ooh, this guy or gal is bad news, right? And so that's kind of how I will categorize. And then if I have to come in and create a new good guy, I'll duplicate the good guy track and kind of keep them all, grouped together. So I've got good guys, middle guys or middle gals, and bad people as well. So that's kind of how I organize the voices if I'm gonna do that and track them. In the live stream, I just kind of did my best guess at what I had done before because, number one, I figure most of y'all weren't tracking the character voices, and it's a live stream, so what are you gonna do? Let's see. That's pretty much it as far as audiobook production. When I'm done with a chapter, so let's just say chapter 1 here, I will highlight the chapter, make sure it's not muted, and then I export it. And I'm not sure if you'll see this, but let me double check. Let me move this up here. If I go mark and export, do you guys see that menu? You do not see that menu. Let me see if I do active track. Do you see that pop-up? You do not see that pop-up. Okay. So let me explain what I do. I basically export whatever chapter I'm done with. So in this case, chapter 1, let's say I finished it, I will export it. There is a software suite called Isotope RX. All I really do, unless something more advanced is needed, which is very rare, all I do is run mouth declick, which takes out any mouth noises because, we make those noises as we talk. You probably don't notice them in the live stream, but now that I've mentioned it, maybe you will start noticing them because our mouths click, our mouths make gurgling sounds, like all kinds of stuff comes out as you're speaking. When you're doing a recording, generally speaking, the microphone will pick all of that up, and you'll be like, oh God, why? And you're the only one who's going to hear it. If you're recording yourself, you will hear every single noise your mouth makes. Most people who are listening won't really hear all that much unless there's like really bad ones in there. For your ears, every single one is a really bad one. But again, somebody else listening to you, they know what you sound like, they know what your voice is, and they are used to listening to other people. Our ears kind of filter them out, so you're not going to hear them. But Isotope will go through, and any of the big ones, any of the ones that are like super, super prominent, it'll surgically remove them from the waveform. I do a little bit of EQ, basically just to take out some of the low end. Most of what the low end is in this studio space, because it's very well treated, it's not soundproof, it's treatment. So basically you're not getting echoes from my voice. You're not getting reverb in this room because there's either sound blankets or the foam on the walls, which cuts down the reflections of all the audio waves that are in the room. But you're still going to get some super low rumble from maybe a truck driving by or a plane flying overhead. Most of the frequencies that make it through into this room are super, super low frequencies. So they're like, if you know anything about audio, it's 0 hertz up to 20,000 hertz. Our audible range is somewhere between, like, let's say 100 hertz and 16,000 hertz, and I'm sure that some people can hear more, but this is that dog whistle effect, right? Like, you can't hear a dog whistle because it's at like 25,000 hertz. It's so high pitched, your ear can't pick it up. Your ear can still hear some of those super low rumble pitches, and they just sound like noise. You're not going to be able to necessarily pick up what it is, but you can tell it's there. It just sounds like a background noise. Some of the EQ that I use just kind of cuts everything below a certain frequency, and so it's much less likely to make it into the finished recording. That's really it. I do mouth to click. I do a little bit of very light equalization, EQ. And then I do what they call loudness control. So for an audiobook, they want it to not be too loud and not be too soft. They want it to be a specific range of volume. So what I do is I run it through that so that it meets all of those specs. That way it sounds consistent all the way through the book. It sounds consistent to other audiobooks. I'm sure you guys have done the thing where you turn on like a movie and you've got the music and the explosions are super loud, but the dialogue is super quiet and you can't hear anything that anybody's saying. So you got to turn up the volume, and then when you get the volume back up, everything is super loud when they get back to the music and the explosions and stuff. Loudness control takes care of that. It basically compresses everything so that it's the same relative volume all the way through the file. It can introduce some artifacts if there's a wild range in volumes, but for the most part, it just makes everything nice and consistent. Amazon Audible requires it to be within a certain range, so I set that. And then that's pretty much it. And then I upload my audiobook. I send it to the publisher, or in the case of being a self-published book, I would just upload it to ACX, Amazon Creative Exchange, directly. And that's how it would work. You can tell that I'm getting tired and my voice is starting to go because I can't form words anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end the live stream there. Now, that was tonight's 24 Days of Christmas. Unfortunately, or fortunately, if you guys got some value out of that insight into audiobook production, it wasn't a new story, but I felt it would be interesting for you guys to understand how much work actually goes into creating an audiobook, like if you're actually narrating an audiobook. And I always listen back to the entire chapter anyway, but I'm listening with a different ear. I'm not listening for mistakes so much as, does it sound consistent? Do the characters sound correct? Does the inflections, do the accents all match? Does everything sound the way it should sound? And then if I need to, I will do some punch and roll. We call them pickups, where you just record over what's already there. But yeah, using punch and roll, there's very rarely a time where I need to go through and actually do that, where I'm recording over something that I've already recorded. Usually it's a small mistake, like I misread a word and didn't notice it, or something like that. But yeah, it's fun. It's a good bit of skill going into this. If you're really good at audio production, if you are computer savvy and you kind of get how all of this works, it usually takes somewhere between 2 and 3 hours to produce one finished hour of audio. So, and that does not include reading the book beforehand. So you're spending however many hours to read the book, and then you're spending 3 hours of recording time. I don't make too many mistakes when I'm recording. I'm very good at reading, which is actually a talent to have, especially when you're reading something that you're not necessarily used to reading. So for me, I'm closer to the 2 hours per finished hour production time. But some people make a lot of mistakes. Some people, and on some days, I make a lot of mistakes. Some days, if I'm tired, I can't read to save my life. It's actually pretty bad. But yeah, between 2 and 3 hours for me. If you're new to audiobook production, or if you're not tech savvy and you're trying to get into this, it can take somewhere between, 5 to 6 to 10 hours per finished hour. And what that means is you're going to be recording 10 hours and doing whatever work you're doing for 10 hours, and you will be left with a finished hour of audiobook, totally produced. So it's a marathon. It's a marathon to get these things produced. And then, if you don't like a character voice and it takes you a couple of iterations to kind of dial in that character voice, that adds to that time. If you're reading a medical narration and you can't quite get the words, because I'm pretty good at reading those very long words and making them seem like a single thought, but sometimes you get one of those words where you're like, what? And I've got a really funny reel on Instagram and I think TikTok, if you want to go and check that out, of me trying to figure out how to say a word in a medical book. But it can, it all adds up. And then, of course, the time to go back and listen to everything through again to make sure that there aren't any crazy errors or mispronunciations or anything like that. So anyway, hopefully this was informative and at least somewhat enjoyable. As you do, if you enjoyed this episode, feel free to buy me a coffee. I like coffee. I don't actually drink coffee, but throw me some money. I like it. Not required, but always appreciated. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow, where we will start The Gifts of the Magi, and that will be the next audiobook. It'll probably just be a single session, sitting down and reading through that and being done with it. It's a pretty short story. And then we're going to be starting a Christmas story that one of my friends, my colleagues, Taylor, recommended. He said it's a public domain book so that I can record it without infringing on anybody's copyrights. And I'm going to give it a look, make sure that it is. And assuming it is, that will probably be the next book that we start. And then as we move in towards the night before Christmas, of course, I will be reading The Night Before Christmas. Christmas Eve, I will be with family, so that one will be a pre-recorded episode. But that just means you can play it whenever you want. I'm going to probably even release that episode earlier in the day, so that if you want to listen to it while you're enjoying dinner or dessert or sitting by the fire waiting for Santa to come, you can put it on and just listen to it. And that one I might actually, since I'm pre-recording it, I may go in and fully produce the audio for it so that it sounds like a professional audiobook reading of that story, so that you can just turn it on and enjoy, as opposed to having an intro, outro, all of that stuff that I do on all of these. Anyway, I'm going to go and drink a lot of tea and let my voice rest, and I think I'm getting over this. Like, I don't feel any worse today. Yesterday, I was driving back from LA, and it was not a fun time in the car. But today, Like everything seems fine. I went to work. I did all kinds of work stuff, and I don't feel any worse. I feel like it's fine. So hopefully I get over it pretty quick. Anyway, everybody, I hope you guys have a great evening. I hope you're enjoying the holiday season as we move towards Christmas and New Year's, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night on another episode of the 24 Days of Christmas. Good night, everybody.